So, super interesting. Our next debate will actually follow within this, and it will focus on the challenge to make diversity and inclusion efforts radiate across the entire organization for impact. How does one, as a leader, truly embrace the opportunities of an improved and more diverse organization? I gladly invite our moderator for this panel, Dana, the Global Head Digital Customer Channels at SWIFT, on stage. Next, I would like to invite Katrien. She's the Diversity and Inclusion Lead at ING Benelux, with almost 10 years of experience in communication change and diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. And our second panelist I would like to invite on stage is Veerle. She's the Managing Director and Head of Retail and Personal Banking at Deutsche Bank. She's responsible for the sales network in Belgium and a real diversity believer. Frederik, you are also welcome on stage. Frederik is the CEO of KBC Securities, the investment banking division of KBC Bank, and he enjoys building diverse and resilient teams, and where possible, with more female leadership inside. I've seen him in action, and I can vouch for that. And last but not least, Monica, you're also invited on stage. Monica is the General Manager of the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium, also known as VBO, as well as Executive Manager of the Competence Center, Labor and Social Security. She's also member of the Board of Directors of Women on Boards.
Thank you, Laura, for the introductions, and thank you for the panel for being here. We've heard already a lot about inclusion and diversity throughout the day, and talking to the panelists in advance of this session, I mean, it's a very wide topic, and there was a lot of interesting stories already and thought-provoking suggestions that came out of it. So it's my challenge to, in the next half hour, to have them share some of these experiences and some challenges, and as Laura said at the end of the session, to have some questions for you in the audience as well. So I will start with you, Katrien, as the diversity lead at ING. I mean, we talked a lot about diversity and inclusion today, and Claire already gave a definition of what inclusion is, but I think for this debate it would be good to just quickly explain what is the difference when we talk about diversity versus inclusion.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, it seems to work. Well, I think it's a really good question because we've heard the terms being, thrown about the whole day already. You hear them more and more in the press. And I think it's really important that we really understand what we mean by them, because they're not the same. They're equally important, and they go hand in hand, or they should ideally go hand in hand, but they're different in nature. When we use the term diversity, it's actually everything that makes us unique as a human being. The visible, but let's also not forget all the invisible things, like our religious beliefs, the way we were raised, in which country we were born, etc. But when we talk about it in a work context, typically what we're looking at is what does our mix the mix of our workforce look like? Who is represented? Are we as a company a good reflection of our current and our future customers? Do we deeply, intimately understand different needs from different constituents and different individuals? And then are we also a good reflection of the society in which we work and which we serve? So that's really the diversity piece. It's getting the mix right. Inclusion linked to that is not so much about the mix or about counting, groups, etc., but it's about how each individual feels in a company. It's very individual. And I think it was Claire who said it before, can you be yourself at work? The beauty, but also a bit the paradoxical thing about inclusion, and it was mentioned before when we were talking about the survey, is it's not about assimilation. It's not about let's get women in this case, or another group that is not dominant currently in the sector, and then let's ask them to fit the mold. This is the success picture, and the person needs to adapt to that, because then you lose all of the value of having diversity in your workforce. So inclusion is really, can you be yourself at work and feel that you belong? And actually, I didn't tell you this yet, Dana, but Frederik and I had a quick chat before. I took a picture in the bathrooms here in the auditorium. I don't know if anybody else did. Yes, I see a hand raised. I also saw something on LinkedIn already, because it struck us that in the little sign that indicates the gender, it says, I don't care, or something like that. And Frederick was asking me, do you have that at ING too, and how does that work? And I was explaining to him that actually, I think this is a really good example of inclusion, because inclusion is about making individuals feeling seen, heard, welcomed. Now, when I first saw a gender-neutral toilet, as a woman, I can't say I liked it. My first reaction was, what is this? Why do we need this? Until I met my first 2 transgender friends. And they explained to me, look, I was a man before, I'm now a woman. But especially when I was in the transition phase, I had the body of a man, but I was dressed in women's clothes, and I didn't feel welcome anywhere. When I went to the women's bathrooms, I got looked at, I got dirty looks. When I went to the men's bathrooms, it was even worse. That was a slip of the tongue. Anyway, so it goes to say, inclusion, I think at the end of the day, is all about making sure that everybody counts. And it's about making sure that when we design things, or when we design processes, rooms, policies, whatever, we don't just think of the majority, like, this will reach a lot of people, but think of every single individual. That doesn't mean you have to, cater for, everything, but it's signaling to everyone in your organization, you're welcome here, just as you are. And I think this example, for instance, from the toilet, is a good example of an inclusive signal.
I have another question that I want to build up on that, because you are a diversity lead at ING, so you're actually having the role to ensure that this inclusiveness is there. And we had some discussion in the preparation of this. Where does that role fit best? And given the topic of the panel, how can we engage senior leaders? Where is your role sitting today at ING? Is it at CEO level? Is it in human resources? And where do you think it would fit best to be successful?
I don't have a straight answer to that, because there's different schools of thought, and I see pros and cons for both. There's currently a lot of thinking saying that it would be best to have such a role reporting directly into the CEO. The big advantage I see of that is, again, with signaling. It's a clear signal to the business that it's really a business topic and not an HR topic. So in that sense, I see the reasoning. In my case, at ING, I'm part of HR, the HR division. The advantage I see with that is that you have more impact. You're closer to the people processes and to the people systems and the data. So for instance, when we just finished doing our annual talent review, if I hadn't been so closely working together with the talent managers, we would never have gone together to do the presentation to the CEO on it. I think before I arrived, in the past, it was a separate thing. You had talent management, and then yes, diversity was important, but there was nobody to, sort of remind them. And now we do these kind of things as a duo, as a tandem. So I think there's pros and cons for both.
Thank you. So that brings me to you, Frederick, as the CEO of KBC Securities. How do you look at it? I mean, we discussed you come from a very diverse background in terms of studies and companies you worked on, and you mentioned that you were exposed a lot to topics like diversity and inclusion. But at a certain point, it made a click for you. So how did it come together for you as a CEO? And what is your role, or how do you see your role in that?
Thank you. Well, it certainly helped that I worked in US companies for the first 16 years of my career, where I did notice some things which I did not recognize when later on I started to work for Belgian companies. I mean, for example, when I started at the Boston Consulting Group, and there was a senior manager, a woman, and she worked part-time, which I thought as a student that was 50%. No, it was actually 80%, and she probably worked 60 hours per week. But within the company, she got certain privileges, let's say, like she could take the Wednesday afternoon off, etc. When I see, and that was back in '97, I see today that there's still a lot of companies that struggle with part-time work of some kind as of a certain level of senior management. So I did notice when I got into this role that there is still quite a lot of work to be done. And then a second element that influenced me personally a lot is that About 20 years or so ago, I married my current wife, and she's quite ambitious professionally. So I saw her making steps and sometimes struggling. And there's one particular episode, I think she worked for a beer company for about 7 years, and she was the only woman in the executive committee. So actually a little bit like Christine. And I saw how she had to adapt, but also how much effort that took and how much energy it sometimes took, and how that was not an inclusive environment. And ultimately she left that company, although it's a great company. And that was certainly one of the elements that contributed to that. So it did create an awareness for the topic that I take with me every day.
Thank you. That ties back a bit to what the governor said of the National Bank when he opened the conference about, the ADKAR model, and you actually need to create awareness and desire for change as well. So do you have some examples of how you bring that awareness as a CEO in your organization and create that desire for change?
I think the first challenge for us, for example, we are a small entity within KBC Group, about 130 people. Awareness is actually the first big challenge, because I experience a bit of a generation gap between the younger people for whom this is a no-brainer. I mean, they expect diversity and inclusion. Men are taking up responsibilities in the household that 20 years ago, I think, wasn't so typical. Whereas the older generation, if we can call it this way, I think they don't necessarily see the issue. For example, one of the things we did is we made an unconscious bias training. We made it mandatory for everybody, not just senior management, middle management, but the whole organization. We invite members of our group ExCo, for example, Christine, to come to talk to the team leads to actually explain why this is an important topic to KBC, to the organization. And obviously people who are closer to the topic will explain it very passionately. We've also had mishaps where like a senior male manager explains that he works 95% of his time and that his family has to deal with it, and that's a choice you make. And so like quite old school ideas, but also that helps to have the conversation. It does create awareness. Role models are very important. I think we worked hard to get our ExCo, let's say our small ExCo for people, to get a 50-50 balance, which we now have. And when we had to hire and find a new member for our board, we have a small board, we couldn't come up with a female candidate, so we did hire an external firm to help us, let's say, expand the list of potential candidates. And I'm actually quite happy that we now have that we did found a very good female independent board member. And why does it help me? Because it forces these topics on the agenda. So when we have a board meeting, when we have a management meeting, topics like culture, inclusion, etc., they are being asked. People ask, let's say, what do you do about it? When we do surveys, people spend more time to look at it than just seeing it as a pro forma, quick, let's say, something you have to do. And then finally, and this is more at a personal level, let's say two things. I think trying to be yourself. Because here we talk about inclusion. I think your definition of inclusion was very, very true. Don't be the robot, the sort of manager, the leader that you think the organization expects you to be. Try to be human. Talk about your own struggles at home with your children. I share the burden of the household with my wife. So sometimes that's actually it can be quite tough. You have to say no to certain meetings. But by being open about it instead of hiding it, people kind of say like, oh, well, it's actually okay to do this, to do that. When you see a woman in your team struggling with the balance, with, let's say, work-life balance or other topics, go and talk to her about it. Try to find solutions either in the workplace or if it's at home, even dare to talk about that. My first advice is always look for a partner or a husband who is supportive. But if that didn't work out, then maybe you can look for other help. Some people take an au pair, some people look for other help around the house. Try to have that conversation rather than ignoring it and then seeing how it will pan out. So that would be my suggestion.
That's good advice, thank you. And I can vouch for what Frederick just said. I think the first time we were in contact, you were very clear saying, this doesn't work for me because I have an appointment with my daughter. And I thought, wow, that's quite open. And as a female, I appreciated that. So That brings me as well to the other topic that we crossed over today already a bit and was sort of not very much discussed, but the return back to the office and the hybrid way of working. And there is a lot of talk about, is this a positive thing, and you know, what do we take out of that? But is it a positive thing for inclusion? And maybe I go first to you, Veerle, on that topic.
I see indeed a lot of advantages with that, and I know there are also disadvantages, but I see more the advantages of that. But for me, it's not a discussion about men or female, so it's nothing to do with the gender. I think it's really helpful for men and for women in a modern labor market where everyone can work. And instead of being stuck in the traffic in the evening, I think it's good to have the quality time for yourself, or for your family and friends, or to work longer. So that's important. And for me, it's important to pay attention to not speak in stereotypes about it, and not to reduce a women's career to just a need of a better work-life balance, and that's not correct. And I think it can be very sensitive. And I have a little anecdote on that also. We had last month we had a town hall with our CEO in Deutsche Bank België, and it was really meant positively. But he made on stage direction and a direct link between we want to promote more women in senior management positions, and the direct link with, and now with our new future of work, it can be very helpful, and it will help women to be there. And even if it was meant very positively, afterwards we received some negative reactions from women who felt misunderstood and who felt even derogatory for them, that they were seen they cannot be there because of their work-life balance. So I think that's a really important one. I think the work-life balance really helps, but it helps for everyone. And it's not only because of a better work-life balance or a hybrid way of working that we will solve the issues around gender diversity. So
I think that came out of the figures of the survey this morning as well, that is not why people considering leaving. They're considering leaving because of culture and leadership. And I know, Frederik, you had a bit of a different view on the hybrid working and inclusion as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think as a financial sector, we proved that working from home works. I think a lot of our staff has worked from home 100% for many, many weeks. And then I think we currently, as a group, have a policy of 50% homework, and I think 2 or 3 days a week. But what I've experienced is that I think when we look at engagement, at energy, at ID generation, at cultural change, I think we've lost a lot of traction, let's say. And that ultimately, obviously, is not good for the company, for the business, but also for the staff. But that on the inclusion topic, then I think it's particularly more difficult to sense how people are doing. I think the type of conversations we have online are very much, it's very functional, they're very to the point, they're often back to back. And I'm now trying to convince people to come back to the office, and it's a bit of a struggle. Younger people have less issues with it, but I think some people have gotten used to the comfort of working from home. So that's a difficult one. And it's harder for me personally to sense how somebody is feeling in his or her role. I mean, all the small clues that you can pick up in conversations, often after the meeting or before the meeting, well, you don't have these moments anymore. So actually this week we now announced that we're going to go back to at least a minimum of 3 days in the office, and 2 days everybody in the office at the same time, so we can rebuild that connection. And for me it's still an open question mark whether women will be more affected by this, let's say, by what we've lost in this process, or men. I think potentially both are impacted. But as we've seen, let's say, the people who value inclusion and belonging and culture, I mean, who find that more important, I think for them it will probably be more of a struggle than for people who just want to get their job done in the most efficient way.
Thank you. So maybe a question back to you, Veerle, building on the culture aspect, because you built your career in Deutsche Bank. You have seen quite an evolution in that journey, and for yourself as well, you broke some ceilings personally as well. So how do you look back on that journey, and where do you think inclusion is now, and what are some of the good examples that you saw or your experience that made the difference?
Yes, I've seen 26 years now, I've seen a lot of positive evolution. I think that Deutsche Bank Belgium, but Deutsche Bank worldwide is for several years occupied with really action plans around diversity and inclusion, not only gender diversity, but also all kind of diversity. That's very important. I think it's not one, it's not one something that we have. It's always a combination of several things. I think sponsorship, supporting women in leadership positions. We have diversity embedded in all our HR processes, like the hiring, promotions, succession planning. So that's really in all our processes. Leadership development and training, because, and I've seen when the people want to leave, it's the blocking factor is leadership. So I think having inclusive leaderships, but create really an inclusive environment is really key. So we had also speak up trainings for everyone in the organization. So that's important, and having the visibility and the attention around it, and a lot of communication that we have about the topic. And also there is an ambition from the group, 35 by 25. It's the quota to reach 35% of all senior positions filled in by women for 25. We are not far from that, and you can be for or against quota. And I think a lot of here also mentioned the importance of measuring, and it's good to measure, but you have to have real action plans behind it, and that's important. When I just look at Belgium, when I take the example of, for example, the population of our branch managers, when I started as a branch manager, I think we were 3 female branch manager on 30 in total, so that's 10%. 10%, and today we are almost at 50%. So I think that's really also, like someone said before, so showing the example, give example, inclusive leadership, but also flexibility, working models, listening to each other. So there we really have done a step in really a good direction. When I just go to the headquarters and I look at the more senior committees, like business committee, like the EXCO committee, I'm the only woman there, so there is still a lot of work to do. But I believe we're on the good way to do it. We see a real issue, and I think it was Nicola who already mentioned it. It's really on the hiring side. Today we have, for example, in the sales, we have several sales positions open, and today, I don't know why, but it's the attractiveness of the sector. For me, we don't arrive to have even female candidates in the pipeline, even if we brief our headhunters to have a very gender-balanced candidate pipeline. We don't just arrive to have them on, even just send them the CV, having them for an interview. So I really believe when we go further that we have to move on there and do something about the attractiveness of the general sector. But I've understood that for women in finance there will be workshops around it. So I'm very happy to hear that, because I think that's a real issue. So.
I think it was a clear message that came out of the survey this morning as well. I mean, personally, I thought it was the most surprising fact, in fact, the culture and what people aspire to, and senior women wanting to leave or considering to leave. So that brings me to you, Monica, because you are sort of the outsider in. Premier De Croo said, you know, we are the best example in the industry, we're leading. We're a bit critical to ourselves. We had positive stories and less positive stories, or doubt that it goes fast enough. So what's your view? Was Premier De Croo right that we are leading by example and we should be proud of what we have achieved so far?
Yes, I would like to start to say that what I heard is from Christine and from Claire, 3 years of very tough work, all on a voluntary basis. And yeah, so what the point is that what Women in Finance did, I would say Fabelfin was one of the early adopters and really said, okay, we have to make a change. And the way how it was tackled is really something, it's a good example. So if our Prime Minister say, you are best in class, I really think he's right. If you see, yeah. And I think it's also because of the holistic approach. The fact that this charter is not just something you sign and then you go on and you don't look further, but it's by signing, you take up a commitment, you set your proper KPIs, it's measured, so these are really very important elements to make it a successful initiative. But I agreed with our Prime Minister, 99.9% of what he said was completely right, but there was just one point where I disagree with him, saying that finance sector is the only sector doing something. That's not right. There are a lot of initiatives. And what is important to say is that, okay, we talk here about diversity, but when I look at all our members, that are all the federations, it's very diverse. So what Women in Finance did, it's a wonderful, good practice, but we cannot just copy it and put it in place into our other sectors. And that's where we come into place. And we started an initiative to bring together all good practices and help our different sectors. And we have also the help from Claire. Thank you for that, Claire. And to see, okay, help them to take similar initiatives. And I also would like to say that, okay, we have Suralia also on board, so also part of Women in Finance, Denuo, that's the recycling sector. They also copied the Women in Finance charter. But then we have other sectors like the technology, Agoria. So they face totally other issues because they really need technical profiles, and there it's very difficult to find women. So they do a lot with regard to girls in STEM education. So you see, there are so many initiatives taken. Then we have Federion, that's interim sector. They also did a lot with regard to discrimination. So saying that nothing is going on in other sectors is not right, but it's just that we have to go further and much more further, and that's where we come into play and where we try to convince other sectors to really do something. But on the other hand, and that is also an important element, is, okay, as it was said, this is on a voluntary basis. A number of people really put all their efforts in it. And this is not always easy. When we talk to a number of our sectors, they say, but we don't have the people. We don't have the money. So that can be a problem also. But still, I think if we just find a way to find a lot of people that are interested and put efforts in it, that we can come to something really nice. And it is also something that needs to be done at sectoral level. And that, Claire, you also said that. Just leaving each company, trying to find out what's the best way to go, it's not easy because it's a trial and error. So if the sector can just make a framework and say, okay, all the companies in the sectors, they are confronted with similar problems, so we will put in place a framework, and then you can continue with that, and then you can put in place your proper policy. So that is something that we really need to convince our sectors to go for this way. And on the other hand, and I think I don't have to convince anybody here in the audience, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And sometimes, and then I have to need to be a bit critical towards policymakers, they really think that all problems will be solved just by imposing additional rules. And when I look into the Belgian legislation, there is already so much in place. And just now, it's time that it's the companies themselves that are now going to put in place these diversity and inclusion policies, because we need every talent on the market. There are 200,000 vacancies. So, and I heard also, it's difficult to find female salespersons. It's difficult also to retain people. So if you like it or you don't like it, you need to put in place a diversity and inclusion policy. So I don't think there is any choice anymore.
Okay, so thank you for that. I think I want to conclude by saying that, I mean, we have made progress. There is still a lot to do, but as some people said, what you can measure, you can take action on. And thanks to Women in Finance, we got a lot of new data that will be further shared after this conference. So I think we have our agenda set out. So with that, I'm turning to you, Laura, to see if there's any questions from the audience.
I think over there.
Good afternoon. Vivina Briers, Senior Advisor at EY about gender equality. I have a question for Monica, but I already told her that I was going to ask the question, but I've got a second one. So the first one is VOCA is also an organization, and I'm a member of VOCA, and I think VOCA doesn't do enough. That's the first question. Secondly, not everyone, Frederik, can afford an au pair. So would it be something if we would introduce the child care voucher, like we have the eco voucher and the... Okay, well, that answers my question. And then I asked Monica, are you talking about that within at FEB?
Thank you for your question, Vivina. No, I must say that this is something we really think about. It's not at the table for the moment, but this is something that's not new. And we are certainly favorable for this kind of solutions, because this is a big problem. I haven't talked about the leave systems, but it was there was also a question in the room. And this is a big issue, but not only for women, but also for men. Of course, child care, when parents are going to work, is really a big issue. And it's, sometimes it's not, for people who have enough or a high salary, it's not the biggest problem, but if we deal with people with monoparental situations or people not having a good salary, it's a big issue. And there, I think, yes, there are not enough places and sometimes too expensive. So it can be a good solution, but of course, then it must be also payable for the people. And then if we just look at the leave schemes, we are also so there is a, how do you say, a proposition of the employers where we say, okay, we should reform our leave systems because it's a trap for women. There was a study of the National Bank, very interesting, where you see that all the leave systems are taken up by women. And in Belgium, we have a lot of them, and for a long period of time. And what we see is that it's almost 70% of the women who are taking up these leave systems, and they are working part-time for a long time in their career. And that is a career trap as well. And therefore, we would like to change our leave systems, and our Prime Minister is also very in favor of that, and make them equally so that they will be taken up by both the man and the woman. And that's where we have to come, and that will be a big change maker for having also a more equal situation or a more equal career for men and women.
Rick, you wanted to add something?
No, I mean, on this other topic, we have tried a lot of things. I mean, through the HR sector, trying to reach government with ideas and suggestions on how can you create a flexible form of child support. I mean, because like not everybody needs an au pair. Maybe all you need is 1 hour, 2 hours a day between 4 and 6. It could be the neighbors, somebody in the neighbors who's, let's say, I don't know, who just retired and they do it as a little extra. But there seems to be resistance within the system somewhere. I mean, some interest groups who do not want to see this happen. And as a result, in Belgium, we are extremely inflexible. I mean, either you take somebody on your own personal payroll, which I think we tried this once. I mean, it's terrible, and there's so much red tape. You can have an au pair, but that's not everybody has the space, and you're stuck. I mean, we lived in London, we lived in Australia. There, I think there was much more flexibility, and you can do that for that just 1 hour or 2 hours after work, which gives you peace of mind. The kids have something to eat, maybe they just cook something, you arrive at home, and the whole family is happy. And the fact that we don't have this and that we then can't make this happen, I don't understand.
Okay, it seems that we have room for one more question. The microphone is on its way.
Hello, my name is Karen. I come actually from tech sector, kind of getting a bit of insights in finance. I originally worked for Microsoft, and one of the things that I have experienced growing in my career is that actually there are some issues how tech companies are promoting people. So I would like to know how you in finance are doing that, because when you're growing to management positions, they look at your ability to land deals, to drive pipeline, and they look at several other things. Are you a subject matter expert? But actually when it comes to managing people, which is what you're going to be doing, yeah, that's like it falls in third or fourth place. And what I've even seen recently is that some people are actually being promoted up somewhere else because they can drive great numbers, but yeah, there are a lot of harassment cases involved with this person. So how is the finance sector paying attention that people with a high EQ and knowledge on managing people are actually being promoted?
I'm looking at the panel. I mean, it's a tough question to answer, but Veerle, you want to start?
It's difficult. No, it's not difficult. One, and that fact that when I'm just looking at myself, I'm not an expert, not at all. I think I have good insights in people. I'm interested in people, and that's why I've made my career within the bank. And listening to people, and I think for me, when I look around me and on the side of people managers, that's really something that we look about it. And there was someone in the other panel about the evaluations of people, that we evaluate on the what, but also on the how, and that's really something that we do. So from my personal side, but it's just my personal side, I don't have the impression that we only look at the diplomas or just the expertise, but yeah, that's my personal experience.
So maybe, Katrien, as you were saying about diversity, inclusion, and talent processes or HR processes, what your take on that?
I think it's a challenge in finance as well, in every sector, that you're typically, that's very clear, time is up. I will just briefly finish my answer. First look at the business and at the results. However, it's a bit what, I don't know if it was you, Stephen, or your colleague who said it, but in the end, it's also about the long term and seeing what will be the effect on your company in the long term. If you bring in a lot of money, but people all around you are leaving and you get exposed externally for harassment, this is something that in this day and age just, will not be accepted anymore. So I think more and more companies are starting to realize we need to invest in people management skills. And when we saw, on the slide, the different aspects of this is what people see, or these are the characteristics they associate with finance, and this is what they want to see more of, I think that's the answer to your question, to say we need more of that, what Danielle called earlier, balanced leadership. And bringing in women into the sector is one way of doing that. It's not just about having more women because it's the right thing to do, but also about, how do we make sure that we get enough representation to see different styles of leadership, whether it's between men and women, or it doesn't even matter, but to see that there are differences. And at the end of the day, somebody said, at the end, it's all about good management. And I think companies are more and more, also in finance, starting to get that money alone in the short term is one thing, but you need to be sustainable. And in this day and age, if I look at my career in the diversity and inclusion field in the last 10 years, when I started out, the focus was really on diversity. We need to get the mix, we need to get representation. It still is, and it still should be. But I think more and more companies are realizing if we don't have the inclusion element, and a very important part of that is leadership, what shadow do you leave in the organization? What's the environment you create? Do you make people feel that they belong, or do you make them feel, if you complain, we'll just, promote your manager out of the way, problem solved? More and more companies are starting to realize that's just not acceptable anymore. And I think Christina was very clear on that too. When it comes to, the regulators, but also investors and stakeholders, sustainability is top of mind. This is something also that I didn't see 10 years ago. And as somebody said, sustainability, very often people associate that with climate action only, but the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the number 5, is about gender equality, empowering girls and women to thrive and to participate in society. So are we there yet, also in finance? I don't think so, but I do think the kind of behavior that you described is going to go away more and more quickly. I sincerely hope that, but I think now, I saw something in the press, you must have read it this week.
I will have to cut it here, or we come into timing problems. But I think, as you can see, lots to discuss, probably over cocktail later tonight. But in the meantime, thank you very much.